Reddit, tell me your glitch in the Matrix stories. I can't explain this, and I hardly believe it myself. I've only ever told a couple of people, all of whom refuse to believe it could happen. On 2 occasions I have breathed underwater with no mechanical assistance. I was about 11 when it first happened. I was swimming one afternoon in the diving well at my gym. The pool is about 14 foot deep, with a fairly small surface area. I've always been a strong and confident swimmer, and loved to dive to the bottom of the pool and flip over, open my eyes, and look up at the surface. So, I dive down, and sitting against the wall I have the overwhelming urge to breathe in. I refuse this thought, disbelieving and scoffing at my brain's sheer strangeness, but the thought comes again, and it is utterly convincing. I can't explain why I decided to breathe in. I just know that I wouldn't ever choose to do that, but in this instance I did. I took the most careful, mincing breath in. I could feel great pressure, but I breathed normally. It was air I breathed and not water. I took 4 full breaths while sitting at the bottom of the pool, and after each breath I became more horrified and agitated. My disbelief was outstanding. I kinda freaked and shot to the surface quick as I could. After I rationalized a bit, I calmed down. My logical mind kept thinking that somehow I'd had a bubble of air caught on my face, for how else could I have breathed like that? But over the years of trying to make sense of it, 30 years old now, I recognize that air always finds its way to the surface expediently. It won't just catch around someone's face. I tried to do it again that day, diving and diving, trying to replicate the experience. Got quite a bit of water up my nose before I gave up. It did happen a second time, same pool. 4 years later, I took 5 breaths, same feeling of overwhelming confidence that it would be okay to breathe. Couldn't explain it the second time either. Very strange. Glitch? I don't know. No one has ever believed me, but I've only ever mentioned it to a select few. I still can't figure it out. Does anyone have any physics logic thoughts on this? Has this happened to anyone else? My little sister, call her Susie, and I were exploring the cottage a few years ago and came across a pair of walkie-talkies. Now this in itself wasn't unusual. It's an isolated, sprawling place shared by many friends and family who often leave things behind as they come and go. We run around in the night trying them out, and find out there's about a 10-20 m cutoff range. We're fooling around and eventually we're on opposite sides of the house when something like the following exchange goes down. Me. Breaker come in. This is Thundercat over Susie. Giggling this is Dragon 7. We are closing in on your location over. Me. Negative. You'll never catch me. Thundercat out Susie. Giggling who is this? Me. This is Thundercat. Come in poops Miss Susie. Giggling no who is this? At this point I walk into the next room and see Susie looking through a bookshelf. Walkie-talkie abandoned on the floor. She says hello to me and the giggling is still coming from the walkie-talkie. I look at her. I look at the walkie-talkie and ask wait who is this? The giggling stops on the other end of the line. There's nothing but dead air. The next house is a couple of km away and there's nothing but woods and a spooky cave around us. Susie says she got bored of the walkie-talkie a while ago and denies any part in the goofy codenamed conversation. We search the place top to bottom and find no one and nothing that could have been making the call. We try the walkie-talkie a few more times but are never able to raise our ghost girl again. I still accuse her of having been the voice on the other end of the line once in a while, but deep down I know that when I told her what went down, she showed real fear. This will probably get buried. When I was around 20, a few years ago, I kept having dreams about a woman with long black hair named Aurora pronounced Aurora. They were different dreams but for some reason, her distinct face and name always ended up in them. It got to the point where I would wake up frustrated and confused, trying to Google her name or find out how I was connected to her. After a few months she stopped showing up and I dismissed it, thinking my brain was just being a scumbag. Fast forward a few years later, Halloween 2009, I'm in the car with a friend stopped at a gas station. I'm about to pull out and merge onto a highway when I get a phone call from a random number. So I stopped the car but no one answered. There was a person behind me who grew impatient, honked at me, and then swerved in front of me instead of waiting for 2 seconds for me to move. Second they get on the highway, some silver Civic loses control of their wheel and crashes into the car that swerved in front of me. I called the cops and waited at the gas station for them to come. Turns out the drivers of both cars died. It 100% would have been me if I hadn't have got that phone call. Called it back a few hours later out of gratitude and curiosity. Rang 3 times and went to voicemail. Hi, you've reached Aurora. Please leave your name and number. Never had goosebumps like that in me life. Called it again the next day because I was that confused about the whole situation. Some woman answers. We get to talking. I tell her my entire story including the dreams I had. She tells me she doesn't know how I got her number and that she never called me as far as she remembers. Weird. Ask her if she has a Facebook to confirm if she is in fact the woman in my dreams. Check her Facebook. Holy F. It's her. If that's not a glitch in the Matrix then I'm just batshit crazy. I grew up in North Texas, and one of my friends has a cow farm and a lot of land. The name of the street he lived on was his family name. Me and my friends would go out there a lot on weekends. Way out on the land far from his house. Bring a guitar and some weed, and make a campfire and just hang out. One summer night my friend asked if we wanted to see a haunted house. He said it wasn't really haunted per se, but it was way out in the middle of nowhere, and was abandoned. He said he'd driven by it a few times on farm routes but he never had the stones to go explore it himself, especially not at night. It was one of those times where no one wanted to be the first to say no, so we all said yes. It was a cool, clear night, and we piled into my friend's sedan car. We were listening to some good old classic rock tunes and generally enjoying ourselves. We came to an area where we had to drive over a very old river, which was now a stream. This stream had eroded this patch of land for so long that it had become a very, very steep depression. There was a large plank of wood across the remainder of the stream, making it a flat enough plane to drive across. Our friend assured us it was safe for the car, even though it looked like the angle was too steep for a car to cross without being damaged. By this point, the atmosphere had changed. We were no longer just hanging out all fancy free. Few of us were speaking because we were just looking at the windows at the dark, looming trees and expanses of moonlit grass. We held our breath as we crossed the stream, and when we crossed it, there was a sea change in the way I felt. It was as if I could sense the house getting closer. No one had said a word for the past 10 minutes, other than my friend giving us time estimates of how much further we were from the house. There was nothing out here, not even a paved road. There was a dirt road formed from cars, but it was very old and overgrown, as if it had not been used, except perhaps sparingly, for a decade. Suddenly, I became aware of something that had been present for a good portion of the trip but had occurred so slowly that I hardly noticed. I broke the silence. Everything is black and white. I can only see black and white. Everyone else in the car started to freak out because they could only see black and white, too. There was no color anywhere, just shades of black, like an old photo. Are we dead? I asked. I was convinced we had died along the way, but had not been aware we were dead, like a horror movie. I still have no explanation for this. We pulled up to the house. Color had returned, it seemed, but it was so dark that it didn't matter anyway. The house was 2 stories, at a slight tilt, and the face of the house looked menacingly down at us. It was an old, southern house, with white pillars that had become discolored with age, and faux balconies jutting out from under the 2nd-story windows. About 50 meters from the house was a large, metallic silo. As the headlights from our car washed over the area, the darkness took its time to leave, because it had become so settled there. We began walking slowly towards the house. In the front yard, there were lots of holes in the ground, freshly dug, about the size to fit a small, potted house plant. Inside the holes we found crumpled up pieces of paper. On the paper were crude drawings, like children's drawings. They were of people, stick figures. Some of the stick figures would be upside down, or laying down. Some of the stick figures had faces, and they were all sad, or yelling about something. We went to the silo. It was unlocked. We went inside with a flashlight and lit up the interior portion by portion with a beam from the flashlight. It was totally empty and gleamed like polished chrome. It smelled like sawdust and old oats. I swore I heard the sound of a girl crying, but that might have been the sound of the hinges on the door. Finally, we went to the house. The doors were all broken off the hinges. There was a screen door, and it was partly torn. We went inside. We broke up in 2 groups and tried to explore the whole thing. We were all trying to seem brave, saying things like the thing I'm most afraid of is the floor falling in. There were closets, and we'd hold our breath before we'd open the doors, but found nothing inside. The whole house was completely dark and empty. We only had one flashlight, so there might have been parts that we had missed, but we wanted to get the hell out of there. We got back to the car. One of my friends dared someone to go into the house by himself and sit on the living room and close his eyes for 30 seconds. He said he would do it. I couldn't believe it. I could never do that. He walked off proudly towards the house. We saw him go inside. The living room was the first room on the first floor past the foyer beyond the door. Several minutes passed. We thought he was effing with us, wanting one of us to go in after him so he could give them a scare. That's when we noticed the smell. Something smelled awful in the car. My friend who was driving looked down and saw a dead cat crammed down underneath the pedals. Then we noticed there was cat fur strewn about the car. We freaked out and started honking the horn and flashing the headlights at the house. Our friend didn't come out. Finally, me and my other friend went in after him. When he got to the living room, we found him sitting on the floor, huddled over, his back to a wall with his arms wrapped around his knees and his head buried in his legs. He looked up at us as if we should run away, as if it was too late. We told him to get off his ass so we could get the F out of there. He pointed at the wall behind us. The lights from the car were still flashing, trying to get us to leave. Each time the lights flashed we could see it. All of our names were written on the wall in red. Later that summer, a friend of mine went back to the house during the day and burned it down.